That's it? Nothing to say?
You already decided.
Wait, what is that?
Something you never asked about. This doesn't make sense.
You don't belong here.
You're right. Not in the version you believed. I already took control.
Brandon Hayes leaned back in his chair, watching his wife sign the divorce papers with a calm that irritated him more than any argument ever could. "That's it?" he scoffed. 5 years and you don't even have anything to say? Claire Whitmore didn't look up. Across the room, Lauren Sinclair crossed her arms, satisfied. Brandon smiled, convinced he was walking away from a nobody. He didn't notice the senior attorney's quiet nod toward Claire, or the sealed document waiting to be opened later that day. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 weeks earlier, the decision had already been made. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt butter. Claire stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with slow, careful movements. The pan hissed softly. It was early. The city outside was still half asleep. Inside, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. Behind her, Brandon adjusted his hot tie in the reflection of the microwave door. Burgundy silk, expensive, new, not something they could comfortably afford, not on paper at least. "I'm done, Claire," he said it casually, like he was announcing he was leaving for work. Claire didn't turn around. The spatula hovered midair for a second before she flipped the pancake. It landed unevenly. She didn't fix it. "I already talked to a lawyer," Brandon continued. "Papers are ready. It's simple. Clean. No drama." He walked to the table and dropped a thin folder onto the scratched wood surface. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Claire finally turned. Her face gave him nothing, no anger, no shock, no pleading. Just stillness. "You've already decided," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Brandon exhaled like he'd been waiting for this moment for months. "I should've done it sooner. I mean, look at this place. Look at us. I'm building a career at Sterling and Burke LLP, and I come home to." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "This." Claire followed his hand for a moment, the chipped cabinets, the old coffee maker, the worn edges of the table. Then she looked back at him. "And me?" she asked. Brandon let out a short laugh. "You said it, not me." The words landed harder than he expected, but not because of guilt. Because she didn't react. He wanted something. Anger, tears. Anything that would confirm he was right to leave. Instead, Claire just turned off the stove. The silence stretched. "There's someone else," she said. Again, not a question, Brandon smirked. "Her name's Lauren. She actually understands what I'm trying to build. She doesn't settle." Claire nodded once, like she was checking off a box in her mind. "I see." That irritated him more. "You don't get it," Brandon pushed, his voice sharpening. "I've worked my way up. I'm not that guy anymore. I can't keep dragging around dead weight." Claire picked up the plate and set it on the table in front of him. The pancake was slightly overcooked. "You should eat," she said. Brandon stared at it, then at her. "Are you even listening to me?" "I am, and that's all you have to say?" Claire pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. "What would you like me to say, Brandon?" He absorbed his mouth, closed it again. There was something about the way she looked at him now, not hurt, not broken, just clear, like she finally saw him exactly as he was. He looked away first. "I'll have my lawyer send the official filing," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "You can stay here until the lease ends, or go back to wherever you came from. Honestly, it doesn't matter." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "Where I came from," she repeated quietly. Brandon shrugged. "You've never exactly been open about that, have you?" For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not shame, something else. But it was gone before he could place it. "You're right," she said. "I haven't," Brandon scoffed. "Figures." His phone buzzed, a message, Lauren. He glanced at the screen and smiled without thinking. Claire noticed. "Of course she did. Is she waiting for you?" Claire asked. Brandon slipped the phone into his pocket. "Yeah, somewhere worth being." She walked past him, close enough that he caught the faint scent of her shampoo. Familiar, unchanged. For a moment, he almost said something else. But the moment passed. "I'll sign when the papers come," she said. That stopped him. "That's it?" he asked again, disbelief creeping in. Claire paused by the door to the bedroom. "That's it." Her voice was steady. Not defeated, not emotional. Final. Brandon shook his head, muttering under his breath as he walked out of the apartment. The door shut behind him with a hollow click. Silence filled the space again. Claire stood there for a long time without moving. Then she walked to the table. The folder was still there. She opened it. Her eyes moved across the pages. Precise, focused, not rushed, not confused. When she reached the last page, she didn't pick up a pen. Instead, she reached for her phone. There were no missed calls, or no messages. But one unread email sat quietly at the top of her inbox. Sender a name most people wouldn't recognize. Subject line, estate filing confirmation. Urgent review required. Claire stared at it for a moment. Then she opened it. Her expression didn't change. But her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Outside, somewhere far above the noise of the city, decisions had already been set in motion, and Brandon Hayes had just walked away from the one person who had the power to change everything about his future without even realizing it. Claire didn't move for a long time after opening the email. The apartment was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made every small sound feel louder, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside, the ticking clock above the stove. She read the message once, then again. The wording was precise, formal, legal. Estate filing confirmation. Immediate review required. Edward Whitmore estate. Claire exhaled slowly and set the phone down on the table. Her father was gone. The thought didn't hit her all at once. It moved in layers, first the fact, then the weight. Then the quiet absence that followed. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. There would be time to feel it later. Right now, there were other things moving. She picked up the phone again and scrolled. A second message sat below the email. This one from a number she had saved under a single initial G. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year, Miss Whitmore. We need to speak immediately. It concerns the will. Timing is critical. Claire stared at the message for a moment, then locked the screen. Her gaze drifted to the divorce papers, still lying open on the table. Brandon had already made his move. Now the rest would follow. Later that afternoon, Claire stepped out into the city for the first time since Brandon had left. She wore the same simple cardigan, the same worn jeans. Nothing about her had changed, at least not on the surface. She walked 3 blocks to a small cafe she had been going to for years. The barista greeted her with a nod. No questions, no curiosity. That was how she preferred it. She ordered black coffee and took a seat near the window. 10 minutes later, Gregory Dalton walked in. He didn't belong in a place like this, not in the way he carried himself, not in the way people instinctively moved slightly out of his path. He spotted her immediately. For a brief second, something like relief crossed his face. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly as he approached the table. Claire didn't stand. She simply gestured to the empty chair across from her. "You shouldn't call me that here," she said. Gregory gave a small nod. Understood. He sat down, placing a slim leather folder on the table between them. "He didn't open it yet. You received the email." "I did. And you understand what it means?" Claire looked out the window for a moment before answering. "It means everything is moving forward, whether I'm ready or not." Gregory studied her carefully. "Your father structured this so that delay wouldn't be an option. There are time-sensitive components." Claire's fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup. That sounds like him. There was no bitterness in her voice, just recognition. Gregory hesitated. "There's more." Claire looked back at him. "The estate isn't just financial holdings," he continued. "There are controlling interests, or active ones, some of them tied to ongoing transactions." Claire's expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. "How soon?" "Soon enough that your signature will be required on multiple approvals within days." Claire nodded slowly, processing. "And if I don't?" Gregory didn't hesitate. "Then decisions will be made without your direct input, but they will still be made in your name." That sat heavier. Claire leaned back slightly. "And Sterling and Burke?" she asked. Gregory paused. Then carefully, "One of the entities connected to your father's portfolio holds a minority position, not controlling, but significant enough to influence internal decisions under the right conditions." Claire didn't react outwardly, but inside, something aligned. Brandon. His firm, or the space he thought defined his success. "You didn't tell me that before," she said. "You didn't ask," Gregory replied evenly. Then softer, "And you made it clear you wanted distance from anything connected to your family." Claire gave a faint, almost humorless smile. "I did." Silence settled between them for a moment. The world outside kept cars stopping, at lights, ordinary life continuing without pause. Gregory finally opened the folder. Inside were documents. Structured, organized, dense, legal language, ownership structures, approval lines. And at the bottom of several pages, a blank space, waiting for her signature. You don't have to decide everything today, Gregory said, but there are immediate filings tied to the estate confirmation. If those aren't processed, it could complicate the probate timeline. Claire looked down at the papers, then back up at him. Does anyone else know? Gregory's expression shifted slightly. A small group, legal, financial, people who have been managing things quietly for years. And outside that group, no one. Claire nodded. Good. Gregory watched her carefully. What about your husband? Claire didn't answer right away. She reached for her coffee, took a small sip, then set the cup down again. He won't ask, she said finally. He never has. There was no bitterness in her tone, just certainty. Gregory leaned back slightly. Then you intend to keep it that way? For now, he didn't push further. Claire closed the folder gently. I'll review everything tonight, she said. Send me digital copies as well. They're already encrypted and forwarded to your private account. Of course they were. Claire stood. Gregory followed her lead. For what it's worth, he said quietly, your father trusted your judgment. Even when you chose to stay away from all of this, Claire met his eyes. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. Gregory, she said. Yes, if anyone from Sterling and Burke LLP contacts you about anything related to me, you don't confirm anything. Understood. Claire nodded once and walked out of the cafe. Outside, the air felt different, not heavier, clearer. For the first time since Brandon had dropped those papers on the table, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not revenge, control. Back at the apartment that evening, Claire sat at the table again. The divorce papers were still there, untouched. Beside them now lay Gregory's folder. Two paths, two realities. She reached for her phone, scrolled, and opened a new message. Not to Gregory, not to anyone from her father's world. Instead, she selected a contact saved under someone inside Sterling and Burke LLP. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a second. Then she typed, short, direct. I need confirmation on a pending internal matter. Quietly, she hit send. The message delivered instantly. Claire set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. Somewhere across the city, Brandon Hayes was probably telling Lauren Sinclair how easy everything had been. How clean, how simple. He still believed he had already won. Claire looked at the folder in front of her, then at the divorce papers, and for the first time a quiet, almost imperceptible shift crossed her expression. Not fear, not hesitation. Something else. Because the moment Brandon had decided she was nothing, he had already placed himself on the wrong side of something far bigger than he could see. And now the first piece had just started to move. The reply came faster than Claire expected. Less than 2 minutes. She hadn't even stood up from the table when her phone lit up again. Who is this? No greeting, no signature, just a blunt question. Claire looked at the message, then typed back. Someone reviewing internal exposure tied to a senior associate. She hit send and waited. Across the city, Brandon Hayes was stepping out of a conference room, loosening his tie with one hand while checking his phone with the other. Lauren Sinclair walked beside him, her heels clicking against the polished floor. You look pleased, she said lightly. Brandon smirked. It's been a good day. He didn't mention Claire, not directly, but everything about his mood pointed back to that morning. The signatures, the silence, the ease of it. Lauren slipped her arm through his. So it's done? Basically, Brandon said. Just paperwork now. Clean break. She smiled, satisfied. What about the apartment? She asked. I gave her the option to stay until the lease ends, he said casually, or go back to wherever she came from. Lauren laughed softly, generous. Brandon shrugged. It's more than she deserves. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down. Unknown number. Message sat there, simple and direct. Someone reviewing internal exposure tied to a senior associate. Brandon frowned. That's vague, he muttered. Lauren glanced over. Work? Probably, he said, already typing back. Identify yourself. He hit send and slipped the phone into his pocket. But something about the message stayed with him. Not the words, the tone. It didn't sound like a junior staffer. It didn't sound like someone asking. It sounded like someone already knew. Back in the apartment, Claire watched the typing indicator appear, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, the reply came through. Identify yourself. She stared at the screen for a second, then set the phone down without answering. He didn't need to know. Or not yet. Instead, she reached for Grigory's folder again and flipped it open. Her eyes moved quickly now, not skimming, not hesitating, reading, processing, connecting. There were layers to her father's estate. Not just assets, but structures built to operate without visibility, or shell entities, trust partitions, quiet leverage, and buried within those pages connections. Sterling and Burke LLP appeared again. Not prominently, not loudly, but consistently. Minority stakes, advisory, influence-linked transactions enough to matter, not enough to be obvious. Claire leaned back, thinking. Brandon believed his success came from his own momentum, his own talent, his own rise. He had never stopped to ask what forces might have been quietly stabilizing the ground beneath him. He had never needed to, because she had never let him see it. Her phone buzzed again, a new message. Different number this time, Claire. It's Megan Brooks. I got your contact from HR records a while back. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. Claire blinked, surprised to her in months. Are you okay? The message continued. There's talk at the firm. About Brandon. About some things that don't look right. Claire's expression didn't change, but she picked up the phone. What kind of things? She typed. The response came almost immediately. Expense reports, client meetings that don't match filings. And Lauren Sinclair, she's been accessing files she shouldn't have clearance for. Claire read the message twice, then once more. Not surprised. Just confirmed. I thought you should know, Megan added. You always seemed different, like you saw more than you said. Claire let out a slow breath. I appreciate it, she replied. She paused, then added, keep your distance from anything tied to Brandon's accounts. 3 dots appeared. Claire, what's going on? Claire didn't answer that. Instead, she set the phone down again. Another piece, another shift, not visible to him yet, but real. That evening, Brandon stood in front of the mirror in his new apartment. Society Hill, or high-rise, exactly the kind of place he had pictured for himself. Lauren was in the kitchen behind him, opening a bottle of wine. You're quiet, she said. Just thinking about work, he replied. She walked over, handing him a glass. You're overthinking it, she said. You've moved on, that's what matters. Brandon nodded, taking a sip. You're right, and for a moment, he believed it, until his phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Another message, this one shorter. Check your last 3 client expense approvals. Brandon froze. Lauren noticed immediately. What is it? Nothing, he said quickly, already unlocking his phone, but his fingers moved faster now. He opened his email, pulled up the expense system, scrolled, and then he saw it. A flagged entry, then another, then a third. Minor inconsistencies. Dates slightly off. Approvals that didn't align perfectly. Nothing obvious, nothing that would trigger immediate alarm, unless someone was looking closely. Brandon's jaw tightened. Who is this? He typed again, more aggressively this time. No response. He looked up. Lauren was watching him now. What's going on? She asked. Just a system glitch, he said, forcing a shrug. But his mind was already racing. Who had access to this level of detail? Who was watching his approvals? And why now? Across the city, Claire sat quietly in her dim apartment, her phone resting face down on the table. She hadn't responded. She didn't need to, because the message had already done its job, a small crack. Nothing more, but enough. She reached for Gregory's folder again and turned to the last section. Approval authority, primary signatory, her name, Claire Whitmore. She stared at it for a long moment, then closed the folder gently. For years she had observed. Waited. Measured. Now, for the first time, she was choosing when to act. Her phone buzzed one last time that night. A new message. Not from Brandon, not from Megan, from Gregory. It's scheduled. Board-level discussion tied to Sterling and Burke. 48 hours. Claire's gaze sharpened. 40 picked up the phone, typed a single word, confirmed. Then she set it down and looked at the divorce papers one more time. Still unsigned by the court, still pending. Still reversible in ways Brandon didn't understand. Claire leaned back in her chair, her expression calm. But beneath that calm, everything was shifting. And in 48 hours, someone else would start to notice. The morning of the board discussion arrived with a kind of quiet tension that no one at Sterling and Burke could quite explain. It wasn't visible, not in any obvious way, but it was there. Brandon felt it the moment he walked into the office. Conversation stopped a second too quickly. Eyes lingered a fraction longer than usual. Even the receptionist's greeting felt careful, He ignored it. He had more important things to focus on. The flagged expenses from the night before were still sitting in his inbox, now marked for internal review. He had already drafted explanations, clean, plausible, enough to satisfy anyone who didn't look too closely, and no one ever did. That was the system. That was how things worked. Lauren stepped out of her office just as he reached his floor. "You got the email?" Brandon nodded. "Routine compliance review. It happens." She didn't look convinced. "It's not routine if it's flagged at partner level." "It's not partner level," he said quickly. "It's internal audit, different track." Lauren studied him for a moment, then gave a small shrug. "If you say so." But she didn't drop it completely. "Still, maybe keep things clean for a few days." Brandon forced a smile. "Always do." She smiled back, satisfied enough, and walked away. Brandon watched her go, then turned toward his office. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. He didn't hesitate this time. He opened it immediately. "Your audit trail is thinner than you think. No greeting, no explanation." "Just that." Brandon's jaw tightened. He typed fast. "Stop this. Identify yourself." No response. He stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than he meant to, then locked it. Enough. Whoever it was, they were trying to rattle him, and it was working more than he liked. Across town, Claire sat in a quiet conference room that didn't belong to Sterling and Burke. It belonged to something else, something quieter, something older. Gregory Dalton stood across from her, reviewing a set of documents spread neatly across the table. "The board meeting isn't public," he said. "It's structured as an internal strategy session tied to acquisition positioning." Claire nodded. "Blackstone Meridian?" she asked. Gregory glanced up briefly, then back down, indirectly. "They're not presenting as the buyer, not yet." Claire didn't respond immediately. She already understood what that meant. Layers. Always layers. "Sterling and Burke is more exposed than they realize," Gregory continued. "Their internal controls rely heavily on trust within mid-level associates, people like Brandon." Claire's gaze didn't shift, meaning he's not the exception, she said quietly. "No," Gregory replied. "He's the visible part." A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, measured. Claire reached for one of the documents and flipped it open. Expense reports, approval chains, internal memos. She had seen versions of this before, but not like this. Not organized, not connected. "Timing?" she asked. 48 hours was optimistic, Gregory said. "It's happening sooner." Late afternoon, Claire closed the folder slowly. "Then we don't wait," she said. Gregory studied her for a moment. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, only decision. "I'll make the call," he said. Claire shook her head slightly. "No," she said, "not yet." He paused. "Claire, I want to see how far he goes," she said quietly. The same calm tone, the same controlled distance, but something underneath it had shifted. Not curiosity anymore, not observation, resolution. Gregory nodded once. Understood. Back at the firm, Brandon sat through a compliance meeting that should have been routine. It wasn't. The questions were sharper, more specific. One partner leaned forward slightly. "Can you walk us through the justification for these client expenses?" Brandon didn't hesitate. He had already rehearsed this. "Client development," he said smoothly. "High-value targets, long-term positioning." The partner nodded slowly. "And the discrepancies in documentation?" "Clerical overlap," Brandon replied. "We had parallel entries during a reporting transition. It's already being corrected." Another partner exchanged a glance with the first. Not convinced, but not pushing either, not yet. Brandon leaned back slightly, projecting confidence. This was manageable. Still manageable. Until his phone buzzed again, he ignored it. Focused on the room, kept talking. But the vibration came again and again. Short bursts. Insistent. Finally, during a pause, he glanced down. 3 new messages, all from the same number. "Your explanation doesn't match the ledger. Cross-reference X March 22nd and check who authorized the override." Brandon's breath caught for half a second. He didn't show it. But it was there, because he knew. There had been an override, a small one, quiet, signed off internally, not supposed to stand out, unless someone knew exactly where to look. He locked his phone again, slower this time. The room felt tighter now. The questions continued, but his answers came a fraction slower, a fraction less certain. Lauren noticed, of course she did. She always noticed shifts that affected her. When the meeting finally ended, she pulled him aside immediately. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "Nothing," Brandon said. "Just compliance noise." "Don't lie to me," she said. He hesitated, just for a second, and that was enough. Lauren's expression changed. Not concern, calculation. You didn't tell me everything, she said. I didn't need to, he replied. She stepped back slightly, a subtle distance. Small but real. Brandon felt it. And for the first time, something cold moved through his chest. Because Lauren wasn't loyal. She was strategic, and strategy shifted fast. That evening, Claire stood by the window of the same quiet apartment. The city light stretched out in front of her, unchanged, unaware. Her phone rested in her hand. A new message sat on the screen. From Gregory, it's confirmed. Executive-level presence added to the meeting, not just internal anymore. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't expected. Who? She typed. The reply came quickly. Representative tied to Blackstone Meridian Legal Group. Claire didn't move, didn't speak. Just stared at the message, because that meant one thing. The layers were starting to peel back. Not fully, but enough. She turned from the window and walked back to the table. The folder was still there. Open, waiting. Claire placed her phone beside it and rested her hand lightly on the documents. For years, she had controlled how much of this world touched her life. Now it was stepping forward, and it wouldn't stop. Her phone buzzed again. One final message, unknown number, different from the others. This is Helen Crawford's clerk. The court has received a late filing related to your case. You may want to review it before tomorrow. Claire's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table. A late filing, connected to the divorce, connected to the timing. She picked up the phone slowly, and for the first time, something unexpected entered the equation. Not chaos, or not fear, but acceleration. Because whatever had just been filed was about to bring everything forward. Much sooner than planned, the courthouse felt colder than Claire remembered. Not physically. Just quieter in a way that made every movement feel observed. She walked in alone, dressed the same as before. Simple, neutral, forgettable. Exactly how Brandon still saw her across the room. He was already there. Confident, relaxed, talking to Gregory Dalton as if nothing had shifted in the past 24 hours. Lauren Sinclair sat behind him, her posture composed, her presence deliberate. She belonged in that room, or at least she believed she did. Claire took her seat without looking at any of them. She didn't need to. She could feel Brandon's gaze flick toward her for half a second, then away again. Dismissed. Judge Helen Crawford entered shortly after, her expression unreadable as she took her place. The usual formalities passed quickly. Routine. Predictable. That's what Brandon expected. And for a few minutes, that's exactly what it looked like. Gregory stood, presenting the divorce as straightforward. No shared major assets, no disputes, no alimony requested. Clean, simple finished. Judge Crawford nodded slowly as she reviewed the documents. Mr. Hayes, she said, glancing up briefly, you're requesting dissolution on grounds of irreconcilable differences. Yes, Your Honor, Brandon replied smoothly. And Mrs. Hayes, she continued, turning her attention to Claire, you are not contesting. Claire's voice was quiet. That's correct. Brandon exhaled, almost imperceptibly. It was happening exactly how he planned. Until Judge Crawford paused, just slightly, long enough for the room to notice. I have received an additional filing, she said, her tone shifting just enough to break the rhythm of the hearing. Brandon frowned. Gregory looked up sharply. Claire didn't move. The judge reached for a separate folder, thicker than the rest. Filed late yesterday, she continued. Submitted through counsel, connected to an external estate matter. Gregory cleared his throat. Your Honor, I was not informed of any. It was filed appropriately, Judge Crawford said, cutting him off. And it is directly relevant to this proceeding. The room stilled. Brandon's confidence didn't disappear, but it cracked, just slightly. What kind of filing? He asked, unable to stop himself. Judge Crawford didn't answer him immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze back to Claire. Mrs. Hayes, she said, can you confirm whether Edward Whitmore was your father? The question landed like a weight in the room. Lauren frowned. Gregory went still. Brandon blinked once, twice. He looked at Claire, really looked this time. For the first time in months, Claire met his gaze, calm, unshaken. Yes, she said, one word, no hesitation. Brandon let out a short, disbelieving breath. That what? Who? He laughed once under his breath. Your Honor, I think there's been some confusion, he said quickly. My wife's family, there's no Mr. Hayes, Judge Crawford interrupted, her voice sharper now. This is not a question directed at you. The laughter died in his throat. Gregory shifted beside him. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to review this filing. If this involves estate claims, it may have implications for asset classification. It does, the judge said. She opened the folder. Carefully, deliberately. Claire's hands remained folded in her lap, still controlled. But inside, something had shifted. This was earlier than planned, faster. She hadn't intended for it to surface here, not yet. Judge Crawford adjusted her glasses and began reading. This document is a notice of probate recognition tied to the estate of Edward Whitmore, she said, deceased. A faint murmur rippled through the room. Lauren leaned forward slightly, her expression tightening. Brandon's face had gone completely still. Not shocked yet, just trying to understand. Mrs. Hayes, the judge continued, is listed here under her legal name, Claire Whitmore, as the primary beneficiary and controlling party of said estate. Brandon turned to Claire again, this time slower. Claire, what is she talking about? He asked, his voice lower now. Claire didn't answer him. She didn't need to. Judge Crawford continued reading. The estate includes, but is not limited to, diversified holdings across multiple private entities, international trusts, and controlling interests in several legal and financial organizations. Gregory's pen slipped from his fingers and hit the table. Soft, but loud enough. Lauren's posture shifted, not confident anymore. Calculating again, Brandon's breathing changed. He leaned forward slightly, as if trying to hear better. Or maybe as if leaning closer would make it make sense. This filing, Judge Crawford said, does not finalize distribution, however. It establishes legal recognition of beneficiary status, which may impact ongoing proceedings depending on existing agreements. Gregory found his voice. Your Honor, we need to verify the authenticity of this. It has already been verified, she said. Silence, census. Heavy, unavoidable. Census. Brandon shook his head once, then again. No, he said quietly. No, that's not, Claire. What is this? Claire turned her head slightly toward him. Just enough. Not fully. Something you never asked about, she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Brandon stared at her, searching, replaying every moment, every assumption, every time he had dismissed her. And suddenly, none of it felt stable anymore. Judge Crawford closed the folder. This court will allow a brief recess, she said, after which we will determine how this filing intersects with the dissolution terms. The gavel struck lightly, not final. Not yet. But enough to break the room. Chairs shifted, voices rose in low, urgent whispers. Gregory turned immediately to Brandon. We need to talk now. Lauren stood more slowly, watching Claire, really watching her now, not as competition, not as inconvenience, but as something else, something unknown. Claire remained seated for a moment longer. Then she stood calm, measured, unhurried, as if none of this had surprised her, as if she had always known it would come to this. Brandon stepped toward her. Claire, he said, his voice tight, controlled. What is going on? She stopped, turned, met his eyes fully this time, and for the first time he saw something he had never allowed himself to see before. Not weakness, not dependence. Control. You wanted this to be simple, she said quietly. It isn't. She stepped past him, didn't wait for his response, didn't look back, and as she walked toward the exit, her phone vibrated in her hand. A new message. From Gregory, they're accelerating the board session. It's happening today. Claire's steps didn't slow, but her grip tightened slightly, because now everything was happening at once, and Brandon still didn't understand that the courtroom was only the beginning. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with low voices and shifting tension. Brandon barely heard any of it. All he could hear was the echo of the name, Whitmore. It didn't fit. It didn't belong anywhere in the version of Claire he had built in his mind. He caught up to her just before she reached the exit. Claire, wait. She stopped. Not abruptly, not reluctantly, just stopped, then turned to face him. What is this? Brandon demanded, his voice controlled but tight. That name, that filing. You never asked, she said. Simple, direct, not defensive. That only made it worse. Brandon shook his head. Don't do that. Don't twist this. You don't get to pretend this is on me. I'm not pretending anything, she replied calmly. Lauren stepped closer now, her heels sharp against the tile. Brandon, we need to focus on what this means legally, she said, glancing briefly at Claire, before looking back at him. If she's tied to some estate, it could affect. It doesn't affect anything, Brandon cut in quickly. We signed a prenup, the word landed between them. Lauren relaxed slightly. Then it's fine. Claire's gaze shifted to Lauren for the first time, measured, quiet. You're very confident, she said. Lauren held her stare. I'm informed. Claire nodded once, almost thoughtfully. Then you should read it again, she said. Lauren's expression flickered, just for a second. Gregory approached then, his posture tight, his voice low. We need to go over the documents immediately, he said to Brandon. There are details here we didn't anticipate. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, frustration rising now. Because no one told me my wife was apparently tied to some, what, estate? It's more than that, Gregory said carefully. Claire didn't wait for the rest. She turned and walked away, again, and this time no one followed. The conference room Gregory secured was small, private, and sealed off from the noise of the courthouse. Brandon paced. Lauren stood near the table, arms crossed, watching Gregory as he spread the documents out. What exactly are we looking at? Brandon demanded. Gregory exhaled slowly. We're looking at a recognized beneficiary filing tied to Edward Whitmore's estate. That doesn't mean anything, Brandon said quickly. Plenty of people inherit things. Gregory didn't argue. He just slid one document across the table. Brandon glanced down, then looked again. Numbers, entities, structures. Not the kind of inheritance people talked about casually. Lauren leaned in beside him, reading over his shoulder. What is this? She asked, quieter now. Preliminary asset mapping, Gregory said. Not full disclosure, but enough to establish scale. Brandon's pulse picked up. This isn't real, he said. This has to be exaggerated. It's not exaggerated, Gregory replied. If anything, it's incomplete. Silence filled the room, heavy. Lauren stepped back slowly. You didn't know? She asked Brandon. He didn't answer, because the truth was he didn't. And that realization hit harder than anything else. Gregory continued, his tone measured. The more immediate concern isn't the estate itself. It's how it interacts with your prenup. Brandon looked up sharply. The prenup protects me. Gregory hesitated. Just enough. That depends on how it was structured. Brandon felt something drop in his stomach. What does that mean? It means, Gregory said carefully, if the agreement defines her assets as separate property, including future inheritances, then none of this is subject to division. Lauren's head turned sharply. Future inheritances? Gregory nodded. It's common in high net worth family agreements, especially when estates are structured in advance. Brandon's mind flashed back. The courthouse 5 years ago, a rushed signing papers he hadn't read, because there was nothing to protect, because she had nothing. His chest tightened. No, he said, that's not what I signed. Gregory didn't respond immediately. He just opened another file and turned it toward him. Brandon stared at the signature. His signature, clear, undeniable. The language beneath it dense, legal, precise, and suddenly not irrelevant. Lauren stepped away completely now, distance. Again. So what happened, she asked, her voice cooler. Gregory didn't soften it. If the prenup holds, Brandon has no claim to any of her assets, past or future. Brandon laughed once, a sharp, disbelieving sound. That's insane. I built my career. You built your career independently, Gregory said, which is exactly how the agreement frames your finances. Brandon's hands clenched. Everything he had assumed, everything he had counted on, shifted, fast. Lauren looked at him, really looked, and this time there was no warmth in her expression. Only calculation. You said this was clean, she said quietly. It was supposed to be, Brandon snapped. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The doubt was already there. Across the city, Claire stepped into a different kind of room. Glass walls, minimal design, quiet authority. Gregory wasn't here. Different people were. Older, sharper. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. One of them inclined his head slightly as she entered. Miss Whitmore. The tone carried recognition, not surprise, not curiosity, recognition. Claire took her seat without hesitation. Let's proceed, she said. No explanation, no performance, just decision. A screen flickered to life at the far end of the room. Documents appeared. Structures, ownership layers. Sterling and Burke LLP was there. Not central, but connected, just like before one of the men spoke. The internal instability creates an opportunity. Timing is favorable. Claire didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the screen. On the firm. On the place Brandon believed he controlled. Proceed carefully, she said. Of course. Another voice joined in. We'll need final authorization to move forward with acquisition positioning. The room stilled, waiting. Claire didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch. Just long enough then. Prepare it, she said. Not approval, not yet. But close, very close. Back in the conference room, Brandon sat heavily in his chair. The document still in front of him, the signature still staring back. Lauren stood near the door now, not leaving, but not staying either. In between. "What's your next move?" she asked. Brandon didn't look up. "We proceed with the divorce," he said. "Nothing changes." Lauren didn't answer, because everything had already changed. Brandon's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. Finally, he grabbed it, unknown number. Same as before. He opened the message. Just one line. "The board meeting has been moved up." Brandon frowned. "What board meeting?" He muttered. Another message followed immediately. "The one that decides who actually controls your firm." Brandon went still. Slowly, very slowly, he looked up at Gregory. "Is there a board session today?" he asked. Gregory's expression shifted, only slightly, but enough. "Yes," he said. And in that moment, for the first time, Brandon realized he was already behind. Much further behind than he had ever imagined. Brandon didn't wait for Gregory to say anything else. He was already on his feet, already moving, already trying to get ahead of something he didn't understand. "The board doesn't meet without me," he said sharply as they stepped out of the room. "Not for anything that matters." Gregory didn't answer right away. That silence followed them all the way to the elevator. Lauren didn't come, Brandon noticed. He didn't ask why. He already knew. The ride up to Sterling and Burke LLP felt longer than it should have. Brandon checked his phone again. No new messages, no clarification. Just that single line that refused to make sense. The one that decides who actually controls your firm. He exhaled hard and stepped out as soon as the doors opened. The office floor looked the same. Controlled. Professional, but the energy felt off. Conversation stopped when he passed. Eyes followed him. Not openly, but enough. He walked faster. Gregory kept pace beside him, his expression tight. "You need to stay calm in there," Gregory said quietly. "We don't know the full scope yet." "I don't need a lecture," Brandon snapped. "I need answers." They reached the conference room. The door was already closed. That alone was unusual. Brandon didn't knock. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room fell silent, not gradually, instantly. Every seat at the table was filled. Senior partners, board members, people who didn't gather without reason. Brandon's eyes moved quickly across the room, then stopped. At the far end, a screen active. Documents displayed, legal structures, ownership layers, and right there, Blackstone Meridian Legal Group. He frowned. "What is this?" he demanded, stepping forward. No one answered immediately. Finally, one of the senior partners, an older man Brandon had worked under for years, cleared his throat. "We were about to begin," he said carefully. "Begin what?" Brandon pressed. The man hesitated, then nodded toward the screen. "A review of a proposed acquisition." Brandon let out a short laugh. "Since when does this firm get acquired without me knowing about it?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Then it's not a proposal we initiated." That came from a woman Brandon recognized, but had never spoken to directly. "External counsel, high level. The kind you didn't bring in unless things were serious." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Then who did?" No one answered. Because at that exact moment, the door behind him opened again. Brandon turned, and for a split second, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Claire, standing in the doorway, calm, composed. Exactly the same as she had been in the courtroom. But everything around her had changed. The room shifted, subtly, but undeniably. People straightened. Attention moved, not toward Brandon, toward her. Brandon felt something cold settle in his chest. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Claire didn't respond right away. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, then walked forward, not toward him, toward the head of the table. No one stopped her. No one questioned it. She reached the chair, paused, and then sat down, in the seat no one took unless they had the authority to. Brandon stared. "This isn't funny," he said, his voice low, strained. "You don't belong here." Claire finally looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, there was no softness in her expression. No patience, just clarity. "You're right," she said. "A beat. I don't belong in the version of this room you built in your mind." The words landed harder than anything else. Brandon's pulse spiked. "Then explain it." Claire didn't rush. She turned slightly toward the screen, nodded once, and the display shifted. More documents, more structures. Connections expanding outward, from Sterling and Burke, into something much larger. "This firm," she said, her voice steady, "has been operating under the assumption that its ownership structure was stable." Brandon stepped forward. "It is." Claire didn't even look at him when she answered. It was. The room stayed silent. No one interrupted. Because they already knew something, Brandon didn't. Claire continued. Over the past several years, a series of strategic investments were made through intermediary entities. Brandon shook his head. I would have seen that. No, she said simply. You wouldn't. The certainty in her voice cut through him. Gregory shifted beside him. Just slightly, enough. Claire's gaze flickered to Gregory for a brief moment. Acknowledgement. Nothing more, then back to the screen. The controlling interest, she said, has now been consolidated. Brandon's chest tightened. By who? Claire finally turned fully toward him, and held his gaze for now, she said. By someone you've been underestimating for a very long time. The room didn't react, because they already understood what that meant. Brandon didn't. Not fully, but something inside him started to crack. This is a stunt, he said, forcing the words out. Some kind of leverage play for the divorce. Claire shook her head. Slowly, no, one word. Final? This isn't about the divorce. Brandon let out a breath, sharp and uneven. Then what is it about? Claire leaned back slightly in the chair, completely at ease, as if she had always belonged there, as if this moment had been inevitable. It's about control, she said. The word echoed in the room. Not loud, but absolute. Brandon felt it hit, not just as a statement, as a shift. A real one. His voice dropped. You think you can walk in here and take, I don't think, Claire interrupted. Again calm, again certain. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Brandon looked around the room, at the partners, at the board, at the people who used to look to him. None of them spoke. None of them corrected her. And that was worse than anything she could have said. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Then it buzzed a second time, and a third. Something in his gut told him to look. He pulled it out. An internal email, firm-wide. Subject line: emergency resolution, effective immediately. His fingers tightened as he opened it. The words blurred for a second. Then came into focus, a formal notice. Ownership restructuring, voting rights transferred, interim authority reassigned, to a single controlling entity. He looked up slowly. At Claire, at the woman he had just divorced, at the woman he thought he understood. You, he started. But the sentence didn't finish, because for the first time, Brandon realized he wasn't just behind. He wasn't even in the same game, and across the table, Claire met his gaze without a trace of anger. Only distance, and the quiet certainty of someone who had just taken back everything that was ever hers. The silence in the room didn't break when Brandon spoke again. It broke when someone else did. We should proceed, the senior partner said quietly, avoiding Brandon's eyes. That was when it became real. Not Claire's words, not the documents, but the fact that the room had already moved on from him. Brandon turned slowly, scanning every face again, searching for someone, anyone to push back, to question this, to correct it. No one did. Gregory stood beside him, but even he didn't step in this time. That was new. That was wrong. Brandon's voice hardened. You're all just going to accept this. Based on what? A few documents and a story. Claire didn't react. She simply folded her hands on the table. Calm, patient, as if she had expected this exact response. It's not based on a story, she said. She nodded once toward the screen again. The display shifted. More files appeared. Legal confirmations. Transfer records. Board authorizations. Verified signatures. Years long. Brandon's stomach tightened. This isn't possible, he said, but the conviction wasn't there anymore. Claire's voice stayed even. Every transaction has already been audited, every structure reviewed. You're welcome to challenge it. A small pause, but you won't win. The certainty in her tone wasn't arrogance, it was knowledge. That hit harder. Brandon's jaw clenched. You think you can just walk in here and rewrite everything? Claire looked at him again. Really looked, and this time there was something else behind her eyes. Not anger, not satisfaction, just distance. You rewrote it first, she said. The words landed. Clean. Sharp. You just didn't realize it, she added. Brandon felt the shift again. Not in the room, inside himself. Something slipping, something he couldn't grab back. This is about the divorce, he insisted, trying to pull control back. You're using this to get leverage. Claire shook her head. No, one word, again. Then she leaned forward slightly. This is about what happens after. Brandon froze. After. That word didn't belong here, not in a boardroom, not in a legal discussion. But it settled into place anyway. What does that mean? He asked. Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a folder placed in front of her, opened it, and slid a single document across the table. It stopped just short of Brandon. Gregory picked it up first. His eyes scanned the page, then stopped. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough, Brandon noticed. Give it to me, said. Gregory hesitated. That hesitation told Brandon more than anything else. Then Gregory handed it over. Brandon took it, looked down, and felt the ground shift under him again. It wasn't just about ownership, it was about review, internal review, of conduct, of decisions, of financial movements. His name appeared more than once, so did Lauren's, so did numbers he recognized, and some he didn't. What is this? Brandon demanded. Claire's answer came without hesitation. A formal review process, she said, standard when control changes at this level. Brandon's grip tightened on the paper. You're auditing me? Claire didn't flinch. Yes, the word was quiet, but it carried weight. This is retaliation, Brandon snapped. No, Claire said again, this is accountability. The distinction hit harder than any accusation. Brandon let out a breath, sharp and uneven. You don't have the authority to, I do. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room confirmed it for her. Brandon looked around again. Still no one spoke. Still no one stepped in. That silence had become something else now. Agreement. His chest tightened. You're going after my career, he said. Claire watched him for a moment, long enough to make him uncomfortable. I'm not going after anything, she said. I'm looking at what's already there. Her gaze flickered down briefly to the document in his hand, then back up. You built this yourself. The words didn't sound like an attack, that made them worse. Brandon's mind raced. Lauren, expenses. Accounts. Client dinners, accounts that blurred lines, things that had felt small, harmless, normal. Now they sat on paper, under review, under someone else's control. This won't hold, he said, though the confidence was fading fast. You can't just decide. I didn't decide, Claire interrupted. The structure did. That answer made no sense to him. And that was the point. The gap between what he understood and what was actually happening kept widening. Gregory finally spoke again, his voice careful. Brandon, you should consider getting independent counsel. That landed harder than anything else so far. Independent counsel. Not internal, not firm-backed, separate, protected. Brandon looked at him sharply. You're serious? Gregory didn't look away. Yes, that was it. That was the moment. Not the documents, not the authority, but that. The moment his own firm stopped being his. Brandon let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Unbelievable. He looked at Claire again. Really looked this time, trying to find the woman he thought he knew, the one who stayed quiet, the one who didn't argue, the one who didn't fight back. She was still there. But not in the way he expected. She hadn't changed. He had just never seen her clearly. You planned this, he said. Claire tilted her head slightly, not denying, not confirming. I prepared for reality, she said, another pause. And then you made your choices. The room stayed silent again, but this silence felt different. Final. Brandon's phone buzzed again. He didn't want to check it, but he did. Another internal notification, this time from compliance mandatory meeting, immediate. Subject line, financial conduct review, priority case's name, right there. At the top, Brandon's throat went dry. He looked up, at Claire, at the woman he had dismissed, at the woman now sitting at the head of everything he thought he controlled. You're destroying me. Claire held his gaze. No anger, no satisfaction, just truth. I'm not, she said. A small pause. You did that the moment you believed I didn't matter. The words didn't echo. They settled, deep. And for the first time, Brandon didn't have a response, because somewhere under the shock and the anger and the collapsing control, he knew she wasn't wrong. The room began to move again. Papers shifted. People stood. The meeting wasn't waiting for him anymore. It was moving forward, without him. And as Brandon stood there, still holding the document that had just dismantled everything he thought was stable, Claire reached for another file. Opened it, and this time she didn't slide it across the table. She kept it. Her eyes moved briefly across the page, then back up to him. There's one more thing, she said, quiet, controlled, and far more dangerous than everything that came before. Brandon didn't speak. He couldn't. The words stayed somewhere between his chest and his throat, stuck behind something heavier than anger. Claire watched him for a moment longer. Then she opened the file in front of her, slowly, deliberately, as if there was no urgency left in the room at all. This won't take long, she said. Her tone didn't change, still calm, still controlled. That made it worse. Brandon forced himself to move, to step closer, to look. Because whatever this was, he needed to understand it before it buried him completely. What is it? He asked. Claire didn't look up. A clarification, she said. The word sounded harmless. It wasn't. She turned the document slightly, just enough for the nearest people at the table to see. Then finally she slid it forward, not all the way, just far enough that Brandon had to take the last step himself. He did, slow, reluctant, but he did. And when he looked down, he felt the last piece of control slip. It wasn't about the firm, not directly. It was about Lauren. His grip tightened. "This is irrelevant," he said immediately, too quickly. "This has nothing to do with the firm." Claire finally lifted her eyes. Her voice didn't rise. But it cut through the room anyway. Brandon shook his head. "No, this is personal." "Yes," Claire said, "it is." A beat, and that's exactly why it matters. The silence pressed in again. Brandon looked down at the document. Expense records, private accounts, transfers that didn't go through standard firm channels, names, dates, patterns. He recognized all of it, because he had lived it, because he had hidden it, because he had told himself it didn't matter. Lauren's name appeared again and again and again. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Claire didn't argue. She didn't need to. She reached for another page, turned it, then another, a sequence. Not random, not isolated, connected, structured. "This," she said, tapping lightly on the paper, "is what happens when personal decisions start affecting professional integrity." Brandon exhaled sharply. "You're twisting this." "No," Claire said. "I'm documenting it." That word landed harder than any accusation. Documenting, not claiming, not guessing, recording. Brandon looked up at the others in the room. No one spoke, no one disagreed, because they were already reading the same thing, already seeing the same pattern, already reaching the same conclusion. Gregory stepped forward slightly. "Brandon, these are serious compliance concerns." Brandon turned on him. "You knew about this?" Gregory didn't answer directly. "I knew enough to be concerned," he said carefully. That careful tone told Brandon everything. "You're siding with her," Brandon said. Gregory's expression didn't change. "I'm siding with the firm." That was worse, much worse, because it meant Brandon was no longer the firm. He was just a risk. Claire closed the folder halfway, not fully, just enough to signal that she wasn't finished. "This isn't about punishment," she said. Brandon let out a short, bitter laugh. "It looks a lot like it." Claire didn't react. "It's about consequence," she said. That word settled in the room. "Quiet, final." Brandon ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. "This is still retaliation," he insisted. "You lost in court, so now you're trying to." "I didn't lose," Claire said. The interruption was soft, but absolute. Brandon stopped. For a second. Just a second. But it was enough. Claire leaned back slightly. "Everything that's happening right now," she continued, "was already in motion before the divorce. That changed something. Not in the room, in Brandon." He stared at her, trying to process that, trying to find the flaw, the exaggeration, the lie. There wasn't one. "You're saying this was planned?" he asked. Claire tilted her head slightly. "Prepared," she said. Again, that word. Brandon felt it hit differently this time, because now he understood it, at least partially. She hadn't reacted. She had waited, watched, collected, and then acted. "You knew," he said slowly. "About everything." Claire held his gaze. "Yes, no hesitation, no apology, just truth." The room didn't react, but Brandon did. He felt it. The shift from anger to something else, to something cold. "You let it happen," he said. The accusation came out quieter than he expected. Claire didn't flinch. "I let you make your choices," she said. Another pause. "And I paid attention." That was worse than any confrontation, because it meant she hadn't been blind. She had been patient. Brandon looked down at the document again, at the patterns, at the proof. At the version of himself he didn't want to acknowledge. "You could have stopped it," he said. Claire's expression didn't soften. "It wasn't my responsibility to stop you from becoming who you chose to be." The words settled deep, uncomfortable, unavoidable. Brandon didn't respond, because there wasn't a response that worked. Around them, the room had started moving again. Quiet conversations, low voices, decisions being made. Without him, Claire closed the folder completely this time, then placed her hand on top of it. A small, controlled gesture. "This is only the first phase," she said. "First phase?" Claire nodded once. "The internal review," she said, followed by external reporting if necessary. External. That word hit like a warning. Regulatory bodies. Licensing boards, reputation, everything he had built, everything he thought was stable was suddenly exposed. "You wouldn't," he said. It came out almost like a plea. Claire held his gaze, calm, unmoved. I would do what's required, she said. That was the answer. Not emotional, not personal, just inevitable. Brandon felt something in his chest tighten. Not just fear, realization. He wasn't dealing with someone trying to hurt him. He was dealing with someone who no longer needed him at all. That was worse. Or much worse. His phone buzzed again. He didn't check it this time. He didn't need to. He already knew what it would say. More meetings, more reviews, more consequences. And across the table, Claire stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically. Just done. This will continue without interruption, she said to the room. No one questioned it. No one hesitated. She turned, walked toward the door. And for a moment, Brandon thought she would leave without another word, without even looking at him again. But just before she reached the door, she stopped, not fully turning. Just enough. There's one more thing you should understand, she said. Her voice was quieter now, but somehow heavier. This firm, a small pause, is only a fraction of what you've been standing in. Brandon froze. The words didn't make sense, not fully, but they carried something else, scale, something far beyond this room, beyond the firm, beyond everything he thought he had lost. Claire opened the door and stepped out, leaving Brandon standing there, holding the weight of a truth he still didn't fully understand, and the growing realization that whatever came next was going to be much bigger than him. Brandon didn't lose everything in a single moment. It happened slowly, piece by piece. The firm didn't collapse. It adjusted, cleanly, efficiently, without him at the center of it anymore. His access was reduced first, then his influence. Then his name stopped carrying weight in rooms where it once decided outcomes. The internal review turned into formal findings, not dramatic, not explosive, just precise. Enough to damage trust, enough to make partners distance themselves, enough to make clients reconsider. Lauren didn't stay long. She tried at first, tried to convince him it was temporary, that they could recover. But when the consequences became real, when invitations stopped, when her own family's business with Sinclair Luxury Motors began facing scrutiny, her tone changed. Then she left, quietly, without confrontation, the way people leave when staying no longer benefits them. Brandon told himself he understood, that it made sense. But the silence that followed her absence felt heavier than anything she had ever said. Months later, the world looked different, not ruined, just rearranged. Brandon still worked, still showed up, still tried to rebuild something resembling control, but it smaller now, narrower, defined by limits he had never imagined before. And the worst part wasn't the loss of status. It was the clarity. The slow, unavoidable understanding of how it had all happened, not because of Claire's power, but because of his choices. He saw her again by accident. At least, that's what he told himself. The Edward Whitmore Foundation had hosted a quiet event. Nothing extravagant, no press spectacle. Just a gathering of people who understood what the foundation actually did, long-term housing initiatives, legal access programs, things that didn't make headlines but changed lives. Brandon hadn't planned to be there, but a colleague insisted. Said it would be good for visibility, he agreed, without thinking too much about why the name felt familiar. Until he walked in and saw her. Claire stood near the center of the room, speaking with someone quietly. No spotlight, no performance, just presence. And yet, everything around her shifted slightly. People listened when she spoke, not out of obligation, out of respect. That was the difference. Brandon stopped. For a moment he considered leaving, but he didn't. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully, as if approaching something fragile. Claire noticed him before he reached her. Of course she did, or she always noticed more than she showed. Their eyes met, and for the first time since everything, there was no tension in her expression. No distance, just recognition. You look well, she said. Simple, neutral. Brandon nodded once. You too. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just real. He glanced around the room. This is yours. Claire followed his gaze briefly. It's what I chose to focus on, not what she owned, not what she controlled. What she chose, that landed differently. Brandon let out a quiet breath. I didn't rush to respond. I know, she said. No judgment, no edge, just truth. Another pause. Brandon swallowed. I thought I was upgrading my life. Claire's eyes didn't change. You were chasing something, she said. That doesn't always lead where people think it will. He nodded slowly, because now he knew exactly where it had led. Silence settled again, but this time it felt lighter, not empty, just finished. I'm not asking for anything, Brandon said after a moment. Claire tilted her head slightly. I didn't think you were. That was her boundary. Clear, gentle, unmovable. Brandon nodded again. He understood. Finally, he looked at her one last time. At the woman he had once reduced to something small. At the person who had never needed to prove anything at all. You deserved better, he said. Claire held his gaze, for a second longer than before. Everyone deserves to be seen clearly, she said. Then she turned, not away from him, but toward the life she had built, and walked back into it, without hesitation, without looking back. Brandon stayed where he was for a while, watching. Not her, but everything around her, the quiet respect, the purpose, the absence of anything that needed to be proven, and for the first time he understood what he had actually lost. Not the money, not the position, something much harder to define, and impossible to get back. If you've ever watched someone reveal who they truly are only after it's too late, would you have made a different choice than Brandon?